Hello, and welcome to Glory Be. Interesting people and how they pray.
Each week, we chat with interesting people about their lives, their work, and how they pray. I'm Sharon Hannish.
And I'm Mike Malcolm.
Our guest today is Mr. David Dean, Superintendent of Catholic Schools for the Diocese of Tulsa in eastern Oklahoma. He grew up in Carthage, Missouri, and at age 10 moved to Hutchinson, Kansas. David was raised Presbyterian and converted to the Catholic Church when he was a senior in college at the University of Kansas. He holds a BA in English and Education and a minor in Classics from KU and an MA in Classics also from the University of Kansas. David has been a middle school teacher, a high school teacher, a professor at KU, and a principal/headmaster/president of different schools for the past 39 years. He and his wife, Lorie, have 4 children and 7 grandchildren.
Welcome to the
David.
podcast.
Yeah, we're so excited you're
Great.
here.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here.
As I was thinking about our interview with you, I realized as I was writing this up that you joined the diocese 3 years ago.
Yes.
And then the pandemic hit. How was it as a... First of all, what does a superintendent do, but what does a superintendent do during a pandemic?
Well, that's a great question because I've often joked with people here that I've yet to have a normal year in 3 years. And so obviously I come in as superintendent. I'm new to the job and to the area and everything. And so I'm, of course, very excited to get started and do what superintendents normally do. And then in March, in fact, it was right on St. Patrick's Day, I think, 17th, that we sent everybody home.
Yeah.
And so I'd never done that before in any role as a teacher or, administrative position at all. So, we made the adjustments. And the great thing about being here in Tulsa is that the principals and everybody in the schools were so helpful, and they jumped in. And, we were all a little nervous, if you remember.
Yeah.
When that first broke, a lot of anxiety out there, but we all jumped in, and they did a great job of working on distance learning and, with no preparation. Mm-hmm. I mean, it just landed, right? And so we jumped in and did the best we could. And so it's been an adventure, but we're ready for the adventure to be over.
Yeah.
In terms of COVID, and I think all of us are ready, the faculty and the schools and staff, and certainly the principals and myself, we're ready to get back to that normal that we used to enjoy and really do more things and more focus on, educational issues and new things to do.
Well, being able to dream the bigger picture.
Yes.
What is Catholic education
Exactly.
as opposed to how do we fight germs? Or
Exactly. So, it's been an interesting time but again, I feel very blessed to be here. Bishop Connerla, for example, has been 100% supportive of all these decisions and changes we've had to make because of COVID, and just coming around now and then and saying something to the principals like, I pray for you every day. I appreciate your hard work. And so we're just very blessed to have a great bishop and a supportive group of, throughout all the schools and the pastors as well.
Mm-hmm. So in the Diocese of Tulsa, where we are, there's 2 Catholic high schools that are under the umbrella of the superintendent's office.
Well, not exactly.
Not exactly.
Yes, there are a couple of high schools,
Yeah.
but 3 of the schools, what we call private, and so I don't have any direct jurisdiction over those 3. So, of course, that's Monte Cassino, Cassia Hall, and then San Miguel.
Oh, okay.
Bishop Kelly is kind of in a middle position. I am on the board, but they're no longer technically a diocesan high school.
Okay.
So my input is really through the board, not as superintendent. And then we have the 9 elementary schools, which I have more direct control over those 9. I'm also excited to announce that the Holy Family Classical School is opening in 9th grade this coming August. And may even have a few 10th grade students. We don't know yet. Depends on enrollment. But so we're excited about that. So that actually will be a 3rd high school.
That's a great follow-up to Dr. Brown, who was a guest here about 2 months ago or so, maybe a little longer. And he was hoping to open that. So it's great to hear at the end of the story that 9th grade is a reality.
Yeah, he's done a great job over there. And it's school's growing, and there's a lot of interest in it. I don't think it'll ever be like Bishop Kelly or Cassia Hall, the size and with all the different sort of options, if you will, and programs. But I do think it will serve a real niche group in our community, and there's a lot of desire for it.
Well, and I love that Tulsa, for such a relatively small city, there's a lot of choice for Catholic parents where they might want to send their kids to school.
There is.
Yeah.
There is.
They'll find the one that fits them.
Yes, that's a good thing.
Yeah. Well, and on that, with all those middle schools, those 9 elementary schools, how does that work? The Diocese of Tulsa is such a huge geographic area. And then there's also cultural differences between some schools that have different ethnic populations that it serves. How does that work? How hard is that to pull those schools together to common Catholic principles?
Well, they're all very different, and yet again, I'm just blessed to having great principals and pastors at those respective parishes. So, as you probably know, we have a school in Muskogee, St. Joseph's, and then we have St. John up in Bartlesville. The other schools are in the Tulsa area. Technically, All Saints is in Broken Arrow, but the rest are officially in Tulsa if you go by boundaries. Yeah. And so, yes, each of them are very different schools, and I think that's good, right? I mean, they oftentimes represent their own community, and so, Marquette will not be the same community maybe as St. Peter and Paul, or St. Joseph's won't be the same as St. John and Bartlesville, and on and on. With each and every school, they're different and they're unique, and I think that's good. And so, of course, they all have their own kind of good things, and that really make them special. And then they all have their challenges that are unique to their particular situation. And so, that to me, I like the dynamic sort of nature of that. That okay, I'm going to this school today, and this is what we need to talk about, right? This is what's working, or maybe this is what we need to improve, or whatever, or this is our challenge at this school. And so that really makes it much more interesting, I think, for me. And again, to your point earlier, Mike, that it gives people here in Tulsa a choice, because we do have a lot of what I like to call cross pollination. Yeah. You might have a few families here at St. Mary's that they, as good as the school is here, and much as they love the parish, they send their child to another school, another parish, and that's fine. I mean, that happens at every school. Yeah. Every school. Yeah. Every one. We have this sort of back and forth, right?
What is your role? Like, what does a superintendent do kind of on a daily basis? Are you involved in curriculum? Are you involved in, tell me. I don't know.
Lots of things.
No, I'm sure.
So curriculum is certainly one of them. We help organize, each year we adopt new textbooks based on a different discipline. So, for this year, if it's science, which it is, we collect all these textbooks up at the Chancery from different publishers, and we have the principals and or their teachers, or if they have a curriculum person, it depends on the size of the school, they can come in and whenever they want, we just set them up there in a big room, and they come in and look at them, and we get a lot of feedback on what they like or don't like about those respective books. So that's a big part of it. With COVID, for example, we drew up the policy so that all the schools would have the same policy. And the principals asked for that because there's continuity. So not that any of our parents would do this, for all our parents out there, but just in case there would be one, that if this school A has this policy and school B has that policy, right. Sometimes you get that back and forth. Well, this school's doing that, so why aren't you doing this? And so I said, look, let's just simplify all this. We'll come out of the diocesan policy. I'll be the bad guy. And so that's what we did. Yeah. And I think it really worked pretty well. I received a few phone calls and emails just questioning the policy a little bit. Too strict or not too, not strict enough. Yep. And so that, we do a lot of that. We set a lot of policy. I dive into the handbook quite a bit, and I recommend changes. And I try to do that with principals on a committee or sometimes faculty members. Say, okay, we want to talk about bullying or something, and how does that reflected in the handbook? What is our policy? And as you know, that's sort of a changing dynamic in our culture right now. What exactly defines bullying?
Right.
And so we have a group come in, and I usually have several volunteer, and we'll talk about it, and then we draft a policy, and then eventually it finds its way into the handbook. So I like to get their input, obviously, on those types of issues. And then oftentimes my favorite part of my job is to go out and visit the schools, which has been a little frustrating lately because I haven't done it as much because of COVID, trying to respect the people in the schools and being careful myself. And so respecting all parties here. I haven't been out as much, but it really is my favorite thing. I was that way even as a principal and a teacher back in the day. It was, if I got really frustrated and wondered, what am I doing here? Why am I doing this? Why me, Lord, kind of mentality. I was like, I'm just going to go sit in the classroom and observe or you just even go out in the hallway and talk to the students. And so on the flip side of that, to your question, it's probably the thing I miss the most about being a superintendent. I'm not actually in a school. And so that's been very different for me because I think, as you said, I've been a principal, headmaster, teacher for over 30 years. And it's a long time, to be in an environment which I love. And so now to be just a step removed. And then, of course, made more difficult by COVID. But I'm starting to get out more and visit. So that's really my joy is to be around with the students and see what's going on.
Well, that has to be satisfying.
It is.
And
it really is.
On behalf of everybody who's had a child in any school, thank you for doing that because this has been a tough couple of years.
Well,
so
thank you.
Not a lot of
well done. I mean, we have kids and one at Bishop Kelly and you all have done an excellent job. As you were talking, and I want to make sure we talk about this, that your love for students and that reminds you why you're doing what you're doing. But then I thought, well, how, in your bio, you went to KU and you have this degree in classics and you didn't even grow up Catholic. You grew up Presbyterian. How did you end up Catholic and working in Catholic school? Tell us and talk about that KU Humanities. I mean, one of our bishops,
Archbishop Coakley,
went through that program. My brother-in-law went through that program.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about that and your upbringing and life?
Yes. So, as you noted, I was raised Presbyterian, and my family was very devout Presbyterians. We went every Sunday, and my father sang in the choir. He had a beautiful voice. Yeah. So I grew up listening to beautiful music, these great, and particularly the older hymns like, Bach or someone, and Mozart type hymns and music. And I really enjoyed it. I really did. And I mean, there were times, of course, that you don't want to get up to church Sunday morning, But for overall, I enjoyed it. And so I had this really wonderful upbringing. And so it was time for me to go to college. I went up to KU, and it was kind of interesting. They had this orientation day up there, which was actually kind of dreadful. They paraded all these people in, about talking about dormitories and student health and, I don't know, the student union. And it's like, oh, okay, whatever. And I went with a friend of mine. It was a young lady who was our neighbor, and she was going to KU too. And so we drove up together. And by the end of the day, I said, let's go. This is very boring. And she goes, well, no, we're here.
Yeah.
Stay. So guess what? One of the professors from that program was the last speaker of the day.
Yeah.
Which I probably would have missed had not been for my friend. And so I heard him speak, as Professor Quinn. He was the head of the program. And then I wanted to go talk to him afterwards. I was so excited about it because I did read a lot in high school. My parents were, it was very important to them that I read. And I took extra courses in high school. And so I just loved what this man said. And I said, no, I'm going to go talk to him. Now, my friend was ready to go home.
Yeah.
I said, let's get out of here.
Yeah.
So anyway, I was going to talk to him, and you had to go through kind of interview process at the time. So I got into the program, was accepted and all that. And it's a 2-year program, as you probably know. And so at the end of the second year, I went to one of the professors, Dr. Senior, who was also the Latin teacher, and I was taking Latin from him in addition to the program. So I went in his office one day, and I said, Dr. Senior, there is something you are not telling us. What is it? He looked at me and goes, well, I can't. I said, what do you mean you can't? This is a university. You have academic freedom. You can tell me anything.
Yeah.
And he kind of shrugged a little bit, and he goes, well, all 3 of us are Catholic, but we can't talk about it.
Yeah.
in the classroom. Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that's put out against that program is that these three men were proselytizing, and nothing could be farther from the truth. Right. They never talked about the church. I mean, they couldn't. And besides, how do you work the Catholic Church into Homer's Iliad? Right. I mean, it was written. It's a stretch,
somewhat before the church.
yeah. Over at least 500 years, right? Yeah. So, and of course, the oral tradition goes back even farther. Right. So, yeah, that's kind of a stretch. But anyway, so he said, well, there are a number of students who've expressed interest like you, and so I began this process of going to the church, and I had to go meet with the local priest there in Lawrence, Kansas, and so I did, and I decided that it was Christmas, right before Christmas, my senior year, I entered the church, but before I did, back to my parents, of course, I went home and told them, and so my father was not really happy about it because he was a very devout Presbyterian. And he said, would you go talk to our pastor first? And, of course, I did. And we had a nice, long talk one Saturday morning, and he was pretty good about it. That's what makes you happy, and that sort of thing. So I went back, told my dad. I think he was a little disappointed. He was hoping the pastor would talk me out of it. Right. But so he didn't. But so I entered the church, and I finished my college degree about a year or so later because I went on and got did some additional work in education courses, and so my first teaching job was back in Hutchinson, where I grew up, and at a little Catholic high school there, Trinity High School. Taught English and Latin, and of course I was single, and the Catholic schools, at least in those days, were very good about making sure a young single teacher has plenty to do. So I taught, I think, 5 or 6 courses and coached every season.
Oh, gosh.
So I had no time to get in any trouble, so that was good. Yeah. But no, I really enjoyed it. And then, I did that for 2 years, and then Dr. Senior actually called me, the Latin professor in the program, and said, would you like to come and teach and study Latin underneath me? Wow. I said, of course I would. So I went back to KU, worked on my master's in classics, and did that for 4 years, and actually had started a doctorate. But then he began to have health problems, had to retire. And it was just a great experience for me. Then that's where I met Lorie, my wife, because she was a student in the program at the time. Yeah. And so we got married, and then I started teaching. I only got out once just because of pay. Our family was growing, and I became an actuarial consultant, which was interesting. I actually enjoyed it. And we ended up it was in Wichita, Kansas, ended up setting up the plan for the whole Diocese of Wichita, Kansas. Qualified Retirement Plan, 403B plan. Yeah. Which immediately brought me back into Catholic education, albeit from the outside. And the superintendent there kept saying, David, we need to get you back in Catholic education. You shouldn't be able to work for that, consulting firm. And I didn't end up going back there, but I think providentially, to kind of bring all this up more to today, is that a friend of mine who's an attorney out in New Mexico called me one night, and they had an opening in the Catholic school out there. And it was out in Gallup, which is a missionary diocese, very heavy Native American presence, and Navajo, Indian, Hopi, and Zuni particularly. And so I couldn't even find this place on a map. And we were in Wichita, which is, my wife is from there, and I grew up close to there in Hutchinson. And where is Gallup? So anyway, we ended up going, and that kind of started my path in more the administrative role, like a principal or headmaster, and moved around a few different places, locales and so forth, and kept doing that. But yes, that's how I got started, and I've just always loved it. And I think it's a couple of different things. I give a lot of credit to my own family. Being raised a Presbyterian, it was a good experience for me. It was a good foundation. And I had actually considered, before I converted to the church, maybe being a pastor, in a Presbyterian church. I really thought about that. And so the dynamics changed a little bit when you become Catholic, right? It's a little different situation. But I think that background, wanting to be in a Christian environment, and then I had this wonderful exposure to these great teachers at the University of Kansas. So then the teaching part of it came in, and it's like, okay, so where can I teach, in a Christian? Of course, by the time then Catholic environment. And then I just happened to get my first job, like I said, at that Catholic high school. And it's God's been very good to me. I've been very blessed that opportunities have come up. And so obviously I did that for a number of years. And we were actually out in Phoenix when I heard about the job here in Tulsa.
Yeah.
And I was at a charter school out there. And that was one of the only other time I'd really gotten kind of out of Catholic education.
Yeah.
And again, I just happened to see it advertised, and I heard about it from a friend as well. And I thought, well, gosh, that's sort of a unique, position that I just have never done. And I've always loved, like I said earlier, being in the school.
Yeah.
I thought, well, gosh, maybe God's calling me to this, right? And so, of course, obviously pray about it a lot, and obviously applied, and it worked out. And so it's really been great. I really feel like, despite my own faults and my own stupid mistakes sometimes, that God has always been very providential with me and sort of leading me to to places like here, and of course some others before Tulsa that have really been good. And
it seems like through your life you've made these wonderful, providential, deliberate choices to move forward in what has to benefit your faith life. So, growing up Presbyterian, Catholics pray differently than Presbyterians. What are some of the changes that you might share on how you pray?
Yeah, as I said before, I grew up. Of course, we had beautiful music as part of the service, and then they have a very dynamic kind of Sunday school program, for kids and young people, and so we'd go to those, and we'd immerse ourselves a lot in Scripture, and that was all very good, of course. But you get to about that high school age, and you don't want to go anymore, and all those sort of things. And I had a little bit of that in me, and so then I went to KU, of course, and I got into this program, and I actually did. I went to a Presbyterian church there for a little bit, but I'm old enough that we were kind of coming off the 60s, the early mid 70s. Yeah. And the pastor there I'm sure he was a good man, but he looked a lot like some old hippie.
Yeah.
And the campus was full of that. A lot of people don't realize about it. KU. It was called the Berkeley of the Midwest.
Oh, wow.
In those days. They actually tried to burn down the student union in 1969.
Oh, gosh.
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and a student was shot. It was overshadowed by Kent State. Because that was the worst situation. But anyway, so there were a lot of kind of old hippies around at the time, and I thought, gosh, I'd reached that point in my life. I didn't want that when I went to church.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think, that age is natural for any young person to search a little bit. And so I went to virtually every church in Lawrence except the Catholic one. And it was actually a roommate of mine at the time who said, why don't you come to the Catholic church? I'm like, oh, come on, sorry y'all out there, but you're weird, And that's what I thought at the time.
Right.
Not now. But it was just, all this and up and down and the smoke, what I just not even knowing it was incense at that point in my life. And he was persistent, and so I finally went, and I liked it. It wasn't this bizarre thing that I had conjured up in my head. And so eventually I went back, but I kept going to other, sort of other churches. And now my friend, just so you happen to know, is a monk at Clear Creek Monastery right now, the one that first prompted me to do this. And then I began that more sort of kind of intellectual investigation as well. And a lot of things begin to come together again. I think providentially. One time, so back to the connection between the Presbyterian music and Catholic music, I walked into there in Lawrence a church, and they were doing Vespers in the evening, and it was chanted. And I walked in and I was stunned. Yeah. So again, I think it was a big moment, my conversion to the Catholic Church, but I didn't know it, right? This was God sort of working in me. And so here again, the power of beautiful music, both from the Protestant tradition and the Catholic tradition, earlier in my life and then later in my life, had this profound impact on where I am today. Yeah.
I love that. I love music too, and it draws my heart and praying, but chant, I love chant, But to hear that is what sort of touched your soul or heart when you walked into a Catholic church in a way of praying and anyway, that's something new for our listeners.
Yeah. Well, and Bishop Robert Barron talks about that a lot, beauty as kind of the first step on the way into the Catholic Church, to see that it's such a sensory experience going to Mass.
It is.
There's smells, there's sights, there's sounds. You know,
Yes.
we feel our knees on wooden kneelers, if that's a sensation.
Yeah, very
but it's
similar
all
to Thomas Merton,
Yeah.
who was drawn by the beauty of the churches that he walked in, you know.
So that's the beautiful side. Yes. Has there ever been a time in your life where it was difficult to pray?
There have been times, honestly. There sure are. And I think it's oftentimes becoming too busy. One of my favorite books is The Soul of the Apostolate by Dom Chotard. And he brings this out. I think it was actually a series of retreats he gave to one of the popes, back, I don't know, roughly 100 years ago. And he mentions this all the time. When we lose sight of our prayer life or stop praying altogether, because we can do more if we don't pray, he says it's just the opposite.
Right.
We end up doing less or not as well in our multiple projects that we have going on when we don't take the time to pray. And I think that I'm that person a little bit. It's hard for me to say no, especially in this kind of work, because I love what I do and I want to help people. Mm-hmm. And so someone will come to me and ask, can you help with this or that, or, go to this thing or that thing and events and so forth. And it's, oh, sure, I'm in.
Yeah.
Yep, I'll be on that committee. Yep.
Right.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'll help you with that project. Yeah. What else? What else do you need? And all of a sudden, your time is gone.
Yeah.
It just disappears. Yeah. And so it's been difficult for me sometimes over the years to step back and say, okay, Lord, I'm going to give you this time, and you take care of this.
Right.
Because I'm going to back off, so there's been some really hard times.
Well, and that's a wise way to deal with it.
Yes, we all struggle with that. Will you put a link in the notes to that book?
Absolutely.
Because listeners might want to, I might want to take a look at that book.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, Lorie, thank you so much for being here. It's just been a great interview. And
well, thank you.
We do know you're a busy person, and that you came all the way over here to be a part of this podcast. So the last question we always ask all of our guests is, if you could ask all of our listeners, everyone in the world, to pray for one thing, what would that be?
Well, this probably won't surprise you, but as important as some other causes are, like the unborn and some of the others in our culture, for older people who need help. But really my heart is with children, to pray for children, younger children especially. I feel like there's sort of a new assault on children in our culture. And I hate to get political and all that, but it you watch certain facets of our culture who, even corporations now, the latest being the whole Disney thing down in Florida, was that they're advocating that parents don't have a say-so in how their own children are taught in a school and so forth. And I struggle with that, because a lot of these initiatives coming from these types of people they want to do these things with children without the parents' permission. To me, that's the key. And parents, as we know in the Catholic tradition, are the primary educators. And so I feel like, because children possess this wonderful innocence, and Christ, after all, says we all need to be like children, right? Because of such are the kingdom of heaven. That therefore there's sort of a kind of a renewed sort of assault or attack on these young children from different, perspectives and places. But so I that's my kind of my favorite person, group of people to pray for, because they have this wonderful innocence, and we want them to hang on to that as long as they can. Yes, they'll all grow up someday and face all the challenges of our world, but it's so important for their social, emotional, and spiritual development to maintain that innocence and have a childhood and be happy and a little carefree, and then to learn in all the different ways, not just in school, but out in the woods and around the home and with their families. And so, yes, I'm always praying for children.
And they are very vulnerable.
They are.
But thank you for educating them and shepherding them and protecting them and all the structures that any diocese needs to make that happen. So for shepherding all the principals and teachers and supporting all that, especially in a couple crazy years.
Well, thank you. It's a labor of love, and again, I'm just blessed to be around so many wonderful people.
Well, I wish you the most straightforward year. Next year,
Thank
you've
you.
earned it.
That's something to pray for right there.
I hope you're bored. So
wouldn't that be nice?
That'd be wonderful.
That would be nice.
So, well, thank you again. Would you lead us in a Glory Be?
I'd be pleased to. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
Thank you. Glory Be is a production of the Office of Communications at the Church of St. Mary in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I'm your producer, Mike Malcolm. See you next time.